Before you today are a permit application and a consistency certification for the first phase of a potential two-phase series of seismic imaging surveys using air guns to study active faults offshore and adjacent to the Diablo Canyon power plant. PG&E proposes this fall to survey an area called Box 4. The purpose of the survey is to obtain data to understand better seismic hazards at Diablo Canyon, the location, configuration, and dynamics of faults that could affect the integrity of the plant. The interest in performing these surveys began back in 2006 with passage by the California legislature of Assembly Bill 1632. This bill required the Energy Commission to assess the potential vulnerability of the state's two nuclear plants to a major disruption like a major seismic event. It did not, however, mandate that seismic surveys be performed. The Energy Commission subsequently issued a report that found that an extended shutdown at Diablo Canyon would have major economic and system reliability implications, and that PG&E should update the plant's seismic hazard assessment. That report recommended PG&E use 3D geophysical seismic reflection mapping and other advanced techniques to supplement ongoing seismic research programs. The California Public Utilities Commission then directed PG&E to complete these advanced seismic studies and submit the results as part of the PUC's review of PG&E's Nuclear Regulatory Commission license renewal application for the Diablo Canyon plant. The PUC also convened an independent peer review panel, referred to as the IPRP, comprised of geologists and seismologists, including this commission's geologist, Dr. Mark Johnson, to review and provide comments on seismic hazard studies developed by PG&E. Its scope and purpose is solely technical. The panel was not asked to weigh the benefits of the information to be gained against the environmental costs of conducting the surveys, and was not asked to develop alternatives to the proposed studies. Now, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Bruce Gibson, also a member of the IPRP, are here today if you have questions about its role. During the review of this project, we consulted and coordinated frequently with many other agencies, such as the State Lands Commission, the California Department of Fish and Game, the California Fish and Game Commission, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we also consulted with staff of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. To clarify, although the NRC is requiring all reactor licensees to reevaluate seismic and other hazard risks at their plants in response to the nuclear disaster in Japan, it has not, at this time, required PG&E to undertake any seismic survey. And I also want to make clear that Coastal Commission staff did not require that offshore high energy seismic studies be performed. There's been some confusion on this point. Back in 2009, we issued a letter to PG&E in response to its submittal of a consistency certification to relicense the plant. In that letter, we requested that if 3D seismic data is collected, it be submitted to staff as part of our evaluation of a relicensing proposal. We did not require that any data be collected. PG&E has made some public statements suggesting that Commission staff required that this testing be done. That is not the case, and we intend to write a follow-up letter to PG&E clarifying that point. As Cassidy will address in more detail, there are significant Coastal Act issues associated with the survey proposal. Most significant is the harassment and potential injury and mortality to marine mammals and other marine life due to very loud underwater sound levels. We concluded the survey cannot be found consistent with the Coastal Act's marine resource protection policies. However, because the purpose of this project is to gather information in support of a proposed temporal expansion of a coastal dependent industrial facility, namely the relicensing of the Diablo Canyon plant, we believe that the Commission can consider this project for special approval under the Coastal Dependent Industrial Facility Override provision of the Coastal Act. There's been some question about the applicability of that policy here because the survey itself is not an industrial facility. But in our view, but for PG&E's proposal to expand over time the operation of that coastal dependent industrial facility, we'd likely not see this proposal to perform these surveys. The survey is a component, or a phase, if you will, of PG&E's licensing proposal, and therefore is proposed as part of an expansion that can be considered under the override provision of the Coastal Act. That policy, which is Section 30260, states that notwithstanding an inconsistency with any Chapter 3 policy, the Commission may approve the project if it finds that the proposal meets that policy's three-part test. And now I'm going to ask Cassidy to describe the basis of our staff recommendation.
Thanks, Allison. PG&E's proposed survey would cover an area called Box 4. As shown in this slide, the survey area would begin just over a mile offshore of the entrance to Morro Bay and extend about 17 miles offshore. It would cover about 880 miles back and forth along 53 separate 16-mile-long transect lines. The survey would begin this month and continue through December 31st, if necessary. The science of underwater sound and its impacts is extremely complex, and we still have much to learn about how marine life responds to and is affected by man-made sounds of all levels. However, existing studies show that the sound levels on projects such as this one are among the very loudest sources of man-made underwater sound that exist, and that these sounds have the potential to disturb, injure, and kill a variety of marine life in and around the survey area. Although the sound pulses would be directed downward, given the extremely powerful sound levels involved, highly elevated sound would be received throughout the water column many miles away from the research vessel, as shown in this slide. The small black dot represents the survey vessel, and the colored circles are the distances to different sound levels estimated to be received. Two of the key sound levels and distances I'd like to draw your attention to are the red circle representing 180 decibels with a radius of about 1/2 to 2/3 of a mile from the sound source, and the yellow circle representing 160 decibels with a radius of up to 4 miles from the vessel. As I'll explain in a moment, these levels are important because they represent the areas in which marine mammal observer effort would be directed. This slide does not depict the sound received in the water column below the ship. Bear in mind, however, that the average depth of the survey area is about 330 feet, and the air guns would be directed downward, meaning that the water column and the seafloor near the survey vessel would receive sound levels significantly higher than 180 decibels, most likely in excess of 240 decibels. A specialized ship called the Langseth, shown here, would be used to perform the survey. It would tow 18 air guns about 9 meters deep, as well as 4 3.7-mile-long cables outfitted with sensitive sound recording devices, as shown on the diagram at the bottom of the slide. The air gun array would send out high-intensity sound pulses several times every minute as the vessel moves along the transect lines, allowing sound waves to penetrate through the water column and deep into the earth before being reflected back to the surface, where they can be picked up by the sound recorders stowed behind the vessel. PG&E proposes to use the air gun array 24 hours a day for an estimated 12 days, with 5 additional days for equipment testing and verification. The project before you today is significantly smaller than what PG&E originally proposed to the State Lands Commission and evaluated in an environmental impact report. The original proposal included a total of 4 boxes or zones, all to be surveyed this fall. Although PG&E has reduced the size of its proposed survey area to about 25% of the original size, surveying only Box 4 is still expected to cause significant disturbance, injury, and loss of marine life. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus my remarks on the most sensitive, or most severe potential impacts and the most sensitive species. Research carried out on marine mammal sensitivity to underwater sound over the past decade strongly suggests that some marine mammal species and life stages are particularly susceptible to disturbance and injury from exposure to high levels of underwater sound. Among the most sensitive species is the harbor porpoise. This species shows disturbance behavior at sound levels as low as 145 decibels and can suffer physical injury at levels of 164 decibels. The harbor porpoise has high metabolic requirements and must feed frequently in order to survive. A genetically and geographically isolated porpoise population of about 1,400 to 2,000 animals, known as the Morro Bay stock, is found within and just south of the project area. This project is expected to cause the harbor porpoises within the survey area and surrounding areas to avoid these areas. As the slide demonstrates here, the survey area comprises a substantial portion of what is considered to be the core habitat for the Morro Bay stock of harbor porpoises. The dashed lines on this slide are rough estimates of the propagation distances of several sound levels, 120, 160, and 180 decibels. The project is therefore expected to cause harbor porpoises to move to more marginal habitat areas or crowd within core habitat outside of the project area. Considering the metabolic needs of this species, if this displacement and increased competition for remaining prime habitat leads to reduced foraging opportunities or feeding success, mortality to significant numbers of harbor porpoises could occur. Given its low population size, a loss of as few as 15 animals would bring the population below its optimal size. In addition to these indirect effects, we estimate that as many as 7 animals would experience direct physical injury as a result of the underwater sound generated by the project. Our analysis also indicates that nearly an entire population would be subjected, at least twice, to disturbance effects from the project. In addition, approximately 4,700 other individual marine mammals from 16 other species are estimated to be subjected to disturbance impacts, and 87 individuals from 12 species are estimated to experience direct physical injury. Further, adverse impacts to fish are also anticipated to occur. Based on available research, the most sensitive fish and invertebrate species are likely to be bony fishes with air bladders, such as rockfish, cartilaginous fishes with well-developed ears, such as sharks and rays, as well as squid and octopus. Although limited, several studies suggest that these sensitive species may experience physical injury at sound levels from 156 to 174 decibels, and would likely experience more severe injury or death at levels from 220 to 240 decibels. Using the sound propagation information from this slide, as well as a correction that takes into consideration the tight configuration of transect lines and the repeat exposure that many areas would experience, over 23 square miles in Estero Bay would receive sound levels of 220 decibels or higher, and roughly 6,100 square miles would receive sound levels of 156 decibels or greater. We believe that these unavoidable impacts, as well as those to resources such as marine protected areas and larval organisms, described in the staff report, cause this project to be inconsistent with the marine resource protection policies of the Coastal Act. We also believe that the type and magnitude of the impacts do not allow them to be fully mitigated or avoided. PG&E has nevertheless developed a marine wildlife contingency plan designed to mitigate the project's adverse impacts on marine wildlife. One of the key elements of this plan is the use of marine mammal monitors on the survey vessels to enforce a 160 decibel safety zone and a 180 decibel exclusion zone around the air gun array. The size of these areas is shown on this slide, as I described earlier. A radius of 1/2 to 2/3 of a mile for the 180 decibel exclusion zone, and up to 4 miles for the safety zone. Marine mammals observed in the safety zone would trigger steps such as reduction in vessel speed to try and keep the animals from entering the exclusion zone, where a shutdown of the air guns would be triggered. While the use of marine mammal observers and these zones is a common impact avoidance measure for this type of survey, the proposed night operations and expected difficult sea state conditions reduce the likelihood that the observers will see any marine mammals in the area during these periods. During optimal sea state conditions in daylight hours, successfully observing and identifying marine mammals during the brief time they spend on the surface can be extremely difficult. Night observations and those during high swell and wind are virtually impossible, even more so when small species such as harbor porpoise, seals, and sea otters are involved. PG&E has also helped develop and agreed to fund an extensive monitoring program. The intent of this program is to assess the magnitude and range of adverse impacts to marine mammals that occur as a result of the project, and to stop the project if severe impacts are observed. However, These efforts are not sufficient, nor are they intended to directly reduce or minimize project impacts. Additionally, PG&E has not proposed any mitigation for adverse impacts that are identified through these marine mammal monitoring efforts. PG&E's Marine Wildlife Contingency Plan also includes fish and fisheries monitoring programs. These programs have substantial limitations. The proposed fish monitoring program is oriented primarily towards areas that are no longer within the survey footprint. Additionally, this program uses existing or previously completed long-term monitoring data from a project designed to evaluate the Point Bouchon Marine Protected Area Complex. These data sets are from a project addressing different hypotheses in a different area, so the proposed monitoring is not designed specifically for the proposed project, limiting accurate observation and quantification of this project's impacts to fish species in the project area. As with marine mammals, PG&E has also not proposed any mitigation or compensation for adverse impacts to fish that are observed during these monitoring efforts. In addition to the project's impacts to marine wildlife itself, the project will adversely affect commercial and recreational fisheries. These impacts would result from proposed restrictions in vessel use within a 35 square mile area around the survey vessel, as well as more widespread reductions in catch rates due to injury and loss of fish and the movement of fish outside of the project area. The magnitude and extent of long-term impacts is unknown. PG&E has proposed a fisheries monitoring plan to shed some light on these long-term effects, but it is also oriented towards the Marine Protected Area Complex and does not include any sample sites within the proposed project footprint. This effort would therefore be unable to provide any direct information regarding the effects of the survey on fish populations and fishing effort in the survey area. In addition to the fisheries monitoring plan, PG&E has also proposed to compensate affected fishermen for their lost catch and fishing opportunity through a claims process. We believe the current plan lacks sufficient detail and certainty needed to determine that commercial and recreational fishing activities would be adequately protected as required by the Coastal Act. While impacts to fishing and water-oriented recreation may be addressed through a more comprehensive impact avoidance and compensatory mitigation package, the impacts to marine resources cannot be feasibly avoided or mitigated. Despite these Coastal Act inconsistencies, as Allison stated earlier, we evaluated this project under the Coastal Act's Coastal Dependent Industrial Override Policy, Section 30260. In order for the project to be approved under 30260, however, it must pass each of three separate tests. The first of these tests concerns project alternatives. We've evaluated a variety of alternatives and believe that PG&E has not provided sufficient information to allow the Commission to determine that none of them would be feasible and less environmentally damaging than the proposed project. One of the alternatives is the evaluation of data from PG&E's recently completed and ongoing onshore 2D seismic surveys and offshore low-energy seismic surveys. The scope and location of one of these surveys, the Fall 2011 Low-Energy Offshore Survey effort, is shown in this slide, along with a table describing the common targets that many of these previous surveys share with the proposed high-energy surveys. Once processing and evaluation of the data collected during these recent surveys is complete, we will have a significantly more detailed understanding of the geologic environment at and around the power plant than we do at this time. This understanding may allow for reductions in the proposed scope and durations of the survey. This may substantially reduce the adverse impacts associated with the current project by allowing it to be concentrated in a smaller area and completed more quickly. Another alternative is to reduce the scope of the project or the duration of the use of the full air gun array to ensure that the survey is targeted solely at PG&E's intended targets, which in box 4 are the dip of the Hosgri Fault, the dip of the Los Osos Fault, and the sense of slip of the Los Osos Fault. In your addendum, you'll find a recent letter from PG&E dated November 9, in which PG&E in fact proposes an alternative that would reduce the amount of time that the full air gun array is used. However, neither Commission staff nor the independent peer review panel have evaluated how this change might affect the project's ability to capture data from the expected geologic targets, or how this change might reduce or concentrate environmental impacts. Nonetheless, the proposal provides an example of the kinds of alternatives Commission staff believes should be evaluated before determining that the specific type, extent, and duration of surveys may be needed. An additional alternative that the independent peer review panel, State Lands Commission, and County of San Luis Obispo have discussed at length and agreed would be important includes an additional independent evaluation of the proposed survey techniques. To date, independent third-party experts have not reviewed PG&E's proposed use of the Langseth research vessel and its equipment configuration in order to determine that it is the state-of-the-art, most capable of providing the data PG&E is seeking, with the minimum cost to the environment. The result of this third-party evaluation may indicate that other configurations of survey equipment would be more capable of completing the surveys in a shorter period of time. For these reasons, we believe the project does not meet the first test of Coastal Act Section 30260, since there is insufficient information at this time to conclude that the proposed survey is the least environmentally damaging feasible alternative. We recommend that the Commission deny PG&E's requested permit and object to its consistency certification at this time.